This is From Both Sides, a spontaneous, free-flowing conversation featuring a dynamic team of women, providing insights into both political and civic events affecting the lives of women throughout Pennsylvania. And now, here's your host.
Hello, and welcome to another edition of From Both Sides. I'm Michelle Saletto, your host. Today there are proposals before both Congress and the Pennsylvania General Assembly to raise the minimum wage. Our show today, Minimum Wage and Workers' Worth, will consider the continuing debate whether the federal minimum wage really allows people to afford the basics, and whether raising the minimum wage in Pennsylvania will be an economy booster or an economy buster. And joining me today is our guest co-host, Ann Womble. Ann is the former chair of the Republican Committee of Lancaster County. Ann, welcome to the show again.
Thank you, Michelle. It's a pleasure to be here as always. And I'd like to introduce one of our guests today. This is Beth Ann Mumford, who is the State Director for Americans for Prosperity, which is one of the nation's largest grassroots organizations advocating for free market principles and smaller government. So we want to welcome you today, Beth Ann.
Thank you for having me very much.
Absolutely.
Welcome.
Thanks.
And it's my pleasure to introduce State Representative Patty Kim. Patty represents the 103rd District here in central Pennsylvania, specifically Harrisburg, Steelton, and part of Swatara Township. She is in her second term in the Pennsylvania House and is a former council person on the Harrisburg City Council. So Patty, welcome. I'm glad to have you here.
Glad to be here, Michelle.
Thank you. If we could just start, I want to give a little bit of a historical backdrop for our viewers. It was really during the 1930s when minimum wage issues came to a head. The Depression was going on. Demand for jobs was at an all-time high. The pay for workers was at an all-time low. And when President Franklin Roosevelt was running for re-election in 1936, he promised the American people that if they voted for him, he would do things to improve the atmosphere or conditions of work, and he pledged that he would guarantee a minimum standard of living for people so that they can afford to meet their basic needs. He was elected or re-elected in a landslide victory, and in 1938 the Federal Labor Standards Act was enacted, which provided for protection for workers as well as a minimum wage of 25 cents per hour. So having that said, we've had the minimum wage in this country for many, many years. And it's my understanding, Patty, that you've introduced legislation to raise the minimum wage in Pennsylvania. Could you tell us a little bit about the legislation proposed?
Michelle, this is a reintroduction. Last session I did House Bill 1896. This year it's House Bill 250. Pretty similar. The basis of it is the minimum wage will go up to $9 per hour after 6 months of passage, and after a year later it'll go up to $10.10 an hour. This will also help tipped employees. So after 6 months of passage, it will go up to 50% of the minimum wage, so that would be $4.50 an hour. As you know, right now it's at $2.83 an hour for tipped wages, you know, the servers, people like that. And then 6 months later, or excuse me, a year later, it will be 75% of the minimum wage. And all of this will be adjusted to
Cost of living,
mm-hmm. inflation. And it will be the same pace as lawmakers, judges, and the governor have, so that we don't have to bring up this legislation every year and have people decide, it's time to do this. It will go with inflation. Back in 1969, if the minimum increase went with inflation, we'd be about $10.70 an hour. Mm-hmm. So we're at $7.25. I believe strongly that it needs to go up.
So that they would be automatic increases based on the cost of living over time.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
Yes.
Okay. All right. Great. Good. Well, I didn't realize that tipped workers had a minimum wage.
They do. Yeah. So restaurants are supposed to, if someone works $2.83 and say they only get $2 that hour or whatever, the employers have to pay up to $7.25 no matter how much they receive. So that's the minimum wage.
Okay.
And restaurants some percentage are not doing that. So we're going to also have enforcement in this legislation that will give the Secretary of Department of Labor and Industry some power to give those fines out to restaurants who are not paying the minimum wage.
To enforce it.
To enforce it.
Right,
yes.
right.
Beth Ann, could you tell us generally how does minimum wage legislation and proposals for increases like this affect businesses and the labor market?
Sure. Well, anytime the government gets involved with dictating what private businesses do, how much they pay to their workers, then you're going to distort the private marketplace, the free marketplace. So generally what happens is small businesses under these kind of laws have to raise their wages, and you end up with them deciding to either cut hours, perhaps not expand because that's less money that they have to operate that business. They're not able to provide those additional jobs or additional hours. So a lot of workers end up making less money under the minimum wage laws than they would otherwise.
Well, I don't know, Beth Ann. You know, recently Walmart raised their minimum wage voluntarily.
Yes.
And from what I understand about Walmart is they have a 44% turnover rate of their hourly employees. So it doesn't seem to me that that's helping their business by allowing them to pay, much lower rates, because they themselves have made a decision to raise it because they simply can't retain employees.
Which is exactly how the free market should work. They've made that decision because based on their business model, they have discovered that the marketplace is such for workers that they need to be able to pay those higher wages to retain and attract skilled and qualified and good employees. So the marketplace does adjust for those kind of issues, and the example you just gave is exactly what happens in a free market when a business has to compete for workers. They're going to, potentially decide to raise those salaries so that they can recruit those good workers.
I just believe that, a free market doesn't happen naturally, and then that's probably our differences. And
Sure.
It's fine
Yeah,
to disagree.
absolutely.
We're going to be a good example that we can agree to disagree. But I think the government puts in laws so that we can have a free market. We have those bankruptcy laws, we have patent laws, things in place. And I think the minimum wage with FDR, they didn't want employers to take advantage of the employees.
Right.
And what I think raising the minimum wage is actually shrinking the government. So half of the fast food workers who get paid minimum wage, half of them are using state subsidies to survive. Food stamps, public housing, Medicaid. Why are we, the government, subsidizing multi-billion-dollar companies? I'm not going to name names of big box companies, fast foods. They're not paying their workers enough, so they're going to lean on the state. We could actually save money and taxpayer money if they. How does a mother work full time and then stand in line for food stamps? I want to break that dependency cycle. I want my constituents to have integrity, work for a livable wage, and then move on and don't depend on the state anymore. And I think, I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, a couple things to that point. So when you look at who works for minimum wage, you've got a majority of them are under 24. 30% live in households where the household salary is $75,000 or above. And 80% of those who work for minimum wage don't have families. Now, to your point, yeah, absolutely, we should provide a social safety net for people so that they're not struggling. And we've agreed to do that as a country for a very long time. What you brought up under FDR, part of the reason that came about was because we didn't have that social safety net prior to the crash of 29 that created a lot of problems. So since then, we've obviously implemented some government solutions that provide worker protections. We've implemented a social safety net, and I agree with you. We want people to get out of that social safety net. I would say that distorting the marketplace is probably not the best approach for that. We should make sure that we're focusing on helping people get the skills they need to get those jobs that will help them move up and out.
I agree with you. Education is so important.
Absolutely.
And there is a catch-22. I like to interview my servers and whoever is working in different places. I'm like, so what are you doing? And, what else do you do? And I have a lot of people who say that they're working now, but they're trying to get a degree. People figure out really quickly that if you don't have a degree, you can't make the money that you want to. So you're making $725-ish. You're trying to, pay college or a degree and raise your family. So now they can't get ahead. And so anyways, I'm emphasis on education. I'm with you on that. They really need to have the education. But I feel that 29 states and Washington, D.C. have passed it. Pennsylvania is still one of the last in job growth. There has to be a correlation. All the states around Pennsylvania have raised their minimum wage. They're doing fine. The world hasn't ended. And I'm just being, I'm just trying to loosen things up here. Things haven't ended, and more than half the states have done this. The time has come. We need to raise the minimum wage.
Oh, go ahead.
What's the correlation between raising the minimum wage and the rate of unemployment in a state or in a country?
That's a great question. So, since we've had the minimum wage set in place, there have been a lot of studies. I mean, now it's like 20 years worth of studies. And so what I think the tipping point is not only is $15,000 a year not enough for people to live, but more than half the economists now say there is little to no impact on job loss. That's why they're feeling more comfortable in saying this. You know, Nobel Peace Prize winners, economists are saying this, so that they're feeling more comfortable to endorse an increase in the minimum wage. Little to no impact in jobs. And the premises where I'm coming from is that low-wage workers, if you give them more money, they're not going to put it in their savings account in their beach home in another state. They're going to put it right back in the economy. They're going to buy shoes for the kids. They're going to repair their cars, do things that are going to help the local economy. So it's good to help the low-wage workers, but actually it's going to help all of us in terms of helping the economy. One more quote. I know you're going to say something. Janet Yellen, the federal chairwoman, said, the economy is just not where it's supposed to be. She mentioned wage stagnation was the key, that we're not going back after the Great Recession, that we need to increase the wages so that we can put more money into the economy.
So two things I just want to point out is, the idea that somehow if we raise people's salary, they'll have more money to spend. But that money doesn't appear magically. That money has to come out of somebody else's pocket. So you're taking that money out of the small business owner's pocket, so to give it to somebody else. So dollar for dollar, you're probably not driving that kind of impact to the economy that it sounds like you would be if somehow we just got money off a money tree and gave more to people. I mean, the government doesn't create money, the private business or private sector does. So to move that money from one pocket to another is not actually creating more economic activity. And in a lot of ways, if you end up reducing the number of hours that somebody works, or perhaps the number of jobs that a small businessman is able to provide, then you're negatively impacting the economy overall long term. But the other point that I would want to make is that there are probably ways to help boost the economy. I agree, wage stagnation is a problem. I mean, there was a time when we all got to the end of the week and we had more money in our pocket to spend, and it's been a long time since anybody has felt that way. Obviously, the economy has started to loosen up a little bit. People are seeing a little bit of more activity in the marketplace, which is exactly why a McDonald's or a Walmart can offer those higher wages. But again, we really should be focused on finding opportunities for those people who need them. More opportunity for people means they have more choices in the marketplace to move on from those minimum wage jobs and into higher paid jobs that also require higher skills.
Okay, I think at this point we're going to take a break and hear from our sponsors, and we'll be right back.
From Both Sides is a production of the Susquehanna Valley Center for Public Policy and is made possible by the support of the Pennsylvania Center for Women and Politics at Chatham University, a nonpartisan center devoted to fostering women's public leadership through education, empowerment, and action. The first to focus on women's political involvement in Pennsylvania, the center integrates disciplinary knowledge, civic education, and capacity building, while examining the intersection of women and public policy. From Both Sides is also supported as a public service by Saul Ewing LLP, a law firm with a 100-year tradition of serving the needs of business, government, education, healthcare, technology, and manufacturing in our region. And by the University Center for International Studies, the engine for extending the global reach of the University of Pittsburgh and its students.
Thank you. Welcome back to our show on the minimum wage. Patty, I'm just wondering, how many Pennsylvanians would your proposed legislation affect?
So from the Keystone Research Center, they estimate it would help, if we raised it up to 10, it would affect 1.2 million Pennsylvanians.
Wow. That would really make a difference for people in Pennsylvania.
And why I started this, is my district, I have a 25% poverty level in my district, and really wanted to look at the things that are preventing people from succeeding and doing well. And I saw the transportation issue. If you don't have a car, you can't get a job. If it's not along the bus route and whatnot, people with nonviolent charges in their background also can't help them. So I know that the minimum wage is not a panacea. It's not going to help everyone's problems, but it's going to be one of the tools with public education, with maybe expungement of nonviolent charges, and increased minimum wage will help put together something that can help my constituents and Pennsylvania as well.
You know, I'm thinking about unskilled workers who have started at the minimum wage, who've been working for several years now, have built up experience and skills, and now they're earning $3 or $4 more than the minimum wage. How would they feel? I mean, I'm trying to put myself in their shoes about the minimum wage all of a sudden jumping up so high and closing that gap between where they are now and where first-time minimum wage workers are starting.
Right. So if you look at some of the companies, by the way, the small business majority says about 80% of small businesses countrywide already pay more than the minimum wage. So now we're just kind of looking at the big box companies who the CEO is making like $32 million a year, you know, to kind of trickle down the pay raise. With these jobs, especially the big box fast foods, there's no upward mobility. I read that somewhere the manager, you know, they'll start at $7.50, but the manager will make a whopping $8.63, which is still not enough. Yes. So I believe an increase in minimum wage is going to bring everyone up. The tide will go up, all the boats will rise, and again put more money in the economy as they have more money in their pockets.
Well, I don't know if any of you saw the business owner in Seattle who raised the minimum salary for every employee to $70,000 a year. I mean, he apparently was Entrepreneur of the Year in 2014, and he must make a lot of money. But every person, he believes, needs to have a basic standard of living to be able to meet their needs. And so I applaud him. I think it was some kind of payment processing business where they you know, process bills for various companies. Yeah. But he's a young man. I've seen him on television, and so there's a growing movement. My point: there's a growing movement between Walmart, McDonald's, or locally, our giant markets, our giant supermarkets have raised their minimum wage. So again, I think that they're finding that it's better business because they are going to be able to keep workers, have a better quality worker, and not expend all the training costs as they would when they have these constant turnovers. So
no, I was just going to say, I mean, if that's what's happening in the marketplace with the marketplace signals, or it makes more sense.
So you're happy with that?
A bigger, yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the free market should set those salaries. Nobody's opposed to people making more money. The question is it good? Is it a good use of public policy? And is it the right public policy to drive the kind of changes that we want? Pennsylvania's minimum wage report said in 2013 there were 190,000 Pennsylvania workers earning minimum wage or less. So maybe the bigger issues are some of those wage stagnation issues, making sure that people have the training and the skills that they need. You know, when I was a little girl, my dad always told me the only job you start at the top is digging a ditch. And I spent a good portion of my teenage years and my college years, I paid my way through college working minimum wage jobs. And even when I got out of college, I got a professional job and went at night and worked as a hostess at a restaurant because I had bills to pay and things like that. So, you know, over time you learn the skills, you learn those soft skills about what it takes to maintain and be a good worker, to show up on time, to get the job done, to do more than what's asked. The marketplace makes those decisions for people if you're willing to do the work and get the skills and training. Now, we do have people who are low skilled, and you know, the question is, how do we make sure we get to them and get them the skills they need to move up?
I don't disagree with that, but I also think people have to be able to pay their bills. I think they have to be able to afford medical costs. When I went to the grocery store not too long ago, I saw that Hamburg was $6 or $7 a pound. I obviously don't buy a lot of Hamburg, so I was shocked by the cost. I mean, that used to be a cheap meal when you're having a bunch of people to throw on the grill. How do people who are making $15,000 a year, working 40 hours a week for minimum wage in this state, how do they buy their groceries? How do they afford medical care? How do they afford paying their electric bill? How do you do that?
So Beth Ann was talking about low-skilled workers. 30 years ago, you could get by with a high school diploma. You know, you had the manufacturing jobs, you had, you know, a lot of the physical labor. Those all moved out, outside. You know, now it's in different countries. So what's left is a lot of, you know, the service jobs, you know, big box companies. And in Dauphin County, 50% of my minimum wage workers have some college or a college degree. So now we're having
Really?
college degree
Really?
employees because the jobs are not there.
Sure.
So Governor Wolf, he uses his phrase, jobs that pay, and I agree with it, and let's try to get that. But we need to bring jobs back to Pennsylvania, have workforce development, train the students, train the young people too, and connect them with the jobs, and they will have salaries that they could afford, the hamburgers and the milk. But again, this is a 3, 4, 5-prong approach in getting us to where we want to be.
I can't help but think that what we're really talking about here is needing policies that increase economic growth and opportunities for education for all Pennsylvanians, more so than we really are talking about strictly raising the minimum wage.
So it's more than that.
Right.
That's a good point. And we just really have to emphasize college and helping have affordable tuitions. I mean, that has skyrocketed, with terms of college books and tuition. We just need to adjust things so that people have a wider path to success and out of that poverty cycle.
But I think you feel that our first step here in Pennsylvania is to raise the minimum wage.
Absolutely. It will definitely help.
Won't economic growth take care of this problem?
Absolutely, sure, absolutely. I mean, as the government grows and implements more and more regulations and more laws, then it becomes that much more difficult for businesses to grow and expand. In America today, more small businesses are closing than starting for the first time in American history. So obviously the marketplace is different, and we've got to get at why that is. We should want that economic growth to come from the private sector, and we should want people to have job opportunities that help them move up and afford what they need to afford in their lives. And we haven't seen that since the recession of 08, 09. The country has struggled, and the more that we try to impose these things on top of businesses, the more difficult it makes it for businesses. I know a small business. The man and woman are married. They've been working in this business for 30 years. They've stopped taking a salary from their business so that they can make sure that they meet payroll, so they can meet those health care costs, and so they can continue to provide their customers with what the customers demand to maintain that business. So, there's struggles all around. From our view, the private sector can resolve a lot of these issues if the government gets out of the way. Dictating things into the business community. Sometimes, you're picking winners and losers. You're taking money out of one pocket to give to another.
So
and that doesn't mean you don't
Do
care.
you propose then to do away with the minimum wage across the country?
We've got a federal minimum wage, and we've got a state minimum wage that tracks with that. The question is, should we be focused on this type of public policy, or should we be looking, like Ann said, for ways to increase that economic opportunity across the state? Just grow the pie. We need more people engaged in free market opportunities for finding those jobs and other things, instead of stuck in these cycles of poverty where they don't have those options and choices for themselves.
Well, it seems to me that you're at a pretty moderate point, because just on April the 15th, there were national rallies all across the country calling for an increase in the minimum wage, and they were calling for $15 an hour to help bring people out of poverty. So I don't think this issue is going to go away. Agreed, we need a multi-pronged approach, but I think this is a step.
Right, Michelle, my mom owned a small flower shop, maybe 4 or 5 employees. I didn't get the minimum wage. I had to work for free, sweep the floor, because I couldn't design flowers. But I understand, that there are the struggles, and, the more you give to the employees, the less you take home. So I get that, and that's why, and I thank you for calling the 10-10 reasonable. This is going to be a year and a half. There's going to be times for adjustment. I'm not saying 10-10 tomorrow. They can adjust, and the middle class is the one that creates the jobs. It's the supply and demand. If the middle class has the money to spend, then that will have the economic growth. That's the way I think economic growth is. It's not the billionaire company saying, I'm going to, create more jobs. It's the middle class that actually creates the jobs. So if we add that and increase that class, I think that will come naturally.
So far in this show, we've been talking about people who are actually earning wages, whether they're at the minimum or higher. But changes like this, mandates like this, certainly affect the marketplace of people who won't continue to be employed. In fact, they enter the ranks of the unemployed. So how do you think that kind of result should be addressed?
for those who are not working. Obviously, we want to expand economic opportunity for folks who want to work. I think people are in a far better position when they have jobs and choices in their lives, if they're, capable of working, and that's something that they want to do and need to do. Obviously, when you raise the minimum wage and you put those downward pressures on businesses, you may find that people who had jobs suddenly don't have jobs, or people who had hours don't have the number of
Their
hours
benefits are reduced.
they had, or their benefits are reduced. There's some anecdotal stories out of the Northwest where they did raise the minimum wage recently, that people are finding tips have been lowered because a lot of people feel like the prices have gone up. The employees are now making more money because that minimum wage has gone up, and they're tipping less. So overall,
Wow, we
some of
hope
the
not.
workers are making, and that's anecdotal. Some of these raises in the minimum wage are too new to have the kind of research. So, we've had minimum wage raises in 08, 09. We've had a couple states that have raised the minimum wage, so we'll be able to see what those impacts are.
Okay, well, Patty, what do you think the chances are that your proposed legislation will pass by the time we have a budget? Of course, by the time we have a budget could be later than June, couldn't it?
Oh, for sure. Thanksgiving.
2/3 of Pennsylvanians would like to see a minimum wage increased. Public pressure is mounting, and how much of that pressure will, make the legislators move, I'm not quite sure yet. Obviously, I'm hopeful. Every time I have a press conference or rally, another state has increased the minimum wage. We're going in that direction. I think we're on the right side of the issue. So hopefully, in this next session, that we could see some kind of increase.
What's
Okay.
the competing legislation?
We have one, a colleague of mine, Mark Cohen from Philadelphia, wants it, 1135. So there are higher ones. And then in the Senate, Scott Wagner has one for 875. Three phases. So in 3 years, it'll be at 875.
Well, I'll tell you, we'll be watching closely, and we're looking forward to see what happens with the minimum wage in Pennsylvania, just like I think a lot of Pennsylvanians will be looking. So thank you all for joining us. Thank you to the viewers for joining us for another edition of From Both Sides. And I'll end by saying I hope you agree that, as we do, that for women in Pennsylvania, there is much more that unites us than divides us. Thank you, and see you next time.